where were you? Let's kind of start with there. So where were if you remember, where were your thoughts? Because it's really the thoughts and the feelings that control every action that we make. So where were you before you sort of went on this journey of unraveling your trauma?
Mm-hmm. About we're in 2023, about 14 years ago, I was in a very toxic, abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I was dating a man. I live in the Toronto area, Canada. And my boyfriend at the time was living in New York City. And we started off in a long distance relationship, and everything was beautiful at the beginning. And I decided to do the unthinkable and uproot my life, give up my job, my apartment, and move to New York to be with him. And shortly after moving is when with him, I noticed the behavior shift. And
Mm-hmm.
there were some red flags prior to that, me moving, but I just ignored it. My father had passed away shortly after me moving to New York to be with him. And when I went back to Toronto to bury my father, during that absence, because he didn't come with me on the trip, during that absence, he was constantly like calling me. And at the time I thought, oh, he's being so attentive. I just lost my father. He was like being a supportive boyfriend, but looking back at it now, I knew it was part of his control because I wasn't in his presence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And if the patterns of abuse typically is like they will isolate you first from your friends and family so that you kind of lose your grounding, you lose who you are and all that stuff. So he was calling me nonstop, checking up on me. And I remember my sister at the time made a comment saying, "Oh my gosh, can you just give you a little break?" But at the time, my blinders were fully on, didn't even notice, thought this was normal. And I was dealing with grief as well at the time, so I wasn't fully there. And then I returned back to New York, and the abuse just continued. It just escalated from there. So it first started off with emotional abuse, where he would like always question my loyalty, question my faithfulness. Um, he always accused me of checking out other guys, to the point that if I was walking with him outside, he would literally tell me to keep your head down so I would avoid making eye contact. Now, and then the abuse went from there. So it went from, the emotional abuse then to financial abuse. He didn't want me working at all.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was sexual abuse. He didn't want us using protection. And at the time, I didn't want to get pregnant. At the time, I didn't want to take that chance. I mean, obviously, the moment you're having sex with someone, there's always a chance, but I still want to have some bodily autonomy. So he took that away. Um, and at the time, before meeting him, like I used to go to church and like I was very spiritual, and he was against any type of spiritual anything. So there's spiritual abuse as well. And then it got physical, where he would physically attack me. But when I look back at the time, because I want to speak about trauma, my trauma didn't begin so much at that time. So typically we attract people based on where we are in life, right? We attract who we are sometimes. And when we're in relationships, it usually is a reflection of our thoughts and how we show up. And at the time, I didn't believe I was worthy of love. Like I had a father who was, emotionally unavailable for most of my life.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a very close relationship, and I was always striving for that love. When I go back to my, real attachment wounds, trauma, I really say this really back from childhood. And then it just manifested more when I became an adult in terms of the relationships I had. But the moment you stop being your authentic self is when you are experiencing that trauma dynamic. The moment you have to either people please or you feel you didn't fit in or adjust yourself or your behavior to meet the needs of or manage people's expectations, that's when you're reacting. It's a trauma response. And I've been living a trauma response for the majority of my life,
Mm-hmm.
being dysregulated the majority of my life. And I didn't realize this at the time until later on, because now I'm in the process of becoming trauma informed, I understand now where the attachment wounds came from and just the process of trauma. But I have to say that the abuse that happened with my then partner, I've already had self-abuse myself prior to that. And it just all, goes back to childhood. So my awareness of trauma, and I even have a master's degree in counseling, but it focused more on the mindset and psychology rather. It didn't focus more on the trauma that's happening inside your body, why you react a certain way. So now being trauma informed, I'm more in tune in terms of, okay, this is where it came from. I'm noticing things inside my body. I notice if I'm in a fawn response or if I'm highly dysregulated, where most of my life I just went through the motions thinking that being dysregulated is normal. So and for people with trauma too, sometimes they think it has to be some crazy event. And I mentioned the abuse because people are like, oh, okay, well, that must be where the trauma began. But it actually began, as I said earlier. It just became more, it got out of control because I didn't know how to, because for so long, I was always seeking love from outside of myself.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to attract men that were either emotionally unavailable or abusive. And then I respond, based on that. My anxious attachment style will come up because I'm so used to not being with people, me not being secured, and always attracting people that were more avoidant. And then that dynamic creates that imbalance as well. If I push closer, they push away. And then I will attract men that, weren't safe, but that was familiar to me. So I remained there. That's kind of, where I started to identify the patterns of my trauma.
So there was something that you said in that, which was, which I'm kind of paraphrasing here, is it's almost the punishment, like you abused yourself, which then attracted the partner. And I really get that because that's one of the things I'm really clear on. I haven't had a partner in over 10 years, and my dad passed away in my 30s and my mum passed away about 5 years ago. But the abuse still happens because it's in my head. And there's that voice in my head that is constantly abusing me. And I find that the people that I talk to, that's really what they identify with. Is it's less now that they're an adult. It is less now their past that is the abuser. It's not their parent that might have physically or sexually abused them, or it's not a past partner anymore. It's themselves. Like their protection mechanism is set up now, and mine was set up to constantly abuse me so then nobody else could come near me. Like nobody could ever abuse me as bad as I abused myself. Therefore, whatever they did was nowhere near as bad as what I did from myself. So it never hurt as much as how much I hurt myself.
Yeah.
Can you share, how did you start that unraveling process? Like once you become trauma informed and you become aware of what you're doing, and you become aware of that punishment, and you become aware of that disapproval of yourself, and you can become aware that you have no love for yourself. What was that process for you to start shifting that? Because it sounds like people online, they make it sound like it happens in 5 days, but it doesn't. It's a long process and it's not easy. So can you share that part of your journey once you realized the damage had been done, and once you realized you had done the damage, how did you stop doing it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is, trauma isn't like, there was a lot of like trauma, I put this in quotation, trauma informed mentors, coaches and stuff that sell this idea that you can resolve your trauma in like this 5-minute clearing session. No.
Yeah.
When I began my journey, so once I left the abusive relationship, that's was really my aha awakening. Like, okay, I don't blame, until this day, like I never really been in contact with him, but I don't hold any resentment or bitterness. So I knew it really didn't start with him. After I left that relationship, I did do some counseling, but counseling only really keeps you at the surface level.
Yeah.
But that's when my awareness began that, okay, I have some work to do. Years later, I actually hired it was a dating coach because I was noticing the patterns I was having in terms of the type of men I was attracting. I wanted to kind of break that cycle. And within that container, I learned a lot about, where my attachment styles come from, why I would attract certain people, how come I wasn't feeling safe. And even that, like, there's still layers to that until my most recent coach right now who's really teaching me the trauma informed side. But at that point, I was really able to go back to childhood, do inner work, child work, identifying where it started, and actually doing a lot of forgiveness. I had to forgive myself for settling for less, for staying in that abusive relationship. I was with him for about 3.5 years, for staying there, for choosing people. I had to take radical responsibility for the role I played. Didn't feel like I was good enough or worthy. As a child, you are powerless and helpless to the situation. But as an adult, we can make different choices. So I had to like forgive myself, but not only forgive myself, but treat myself kindly because I wasn't treating myself kindly at all. I used to really go be hard on myself. Like, oh, could you have done that? You're intelligent. Like, why was I with him to begin with? Um, and not just him, there was other relationships that just weren't they weren't as toxic, but I knew that I wasn't feeling worthy of love. So I kept accepting the same pattern. And then understanding why, like what happens in our body, that you can't just fix the mind. You have to fix the body first. And that was a big aha moment for me when I realized that I had to change my body. So my body influences my mind versus my mind influencing the body. Because I was taught mental first, that will impact the body. But in actuality, focusing on the body and why you're not feeling safe is what then changes the dynamic of the brain. That was the game changer for me. That was transformational because now I know, okay, I can't think my way out of trauma. I can't.
Okay, we need to talk about that because I don't understand what that means. Actually, we need to talk about two things. I want to
Yes.
understand more about forgiveness.
Mm.
Like people say,
Yeah.
I had to go through this forgiveness. Say, yes, but what was that? Like, was that a forgiveness mantra? Was that writing down forgiveness things in a journal? What? So I want to cover forgiveness because
Yeah.
it's a really convoluted conversation and it's really fluffed over. People say you just have to forgive, but what is that? And then the next part is what you just said is you had to fix your body. I'm like, what the heck? I don't understand what that means. So let's cover those two things because that I think they are really good conversations to have.
Absolutely. When I was getting my master's degree in mental health counseling, they talk about, you got to count as therapists, you got to go through your own counseling before you could really be a service to other. And during that period, that's where I first started to learn a little bit about the inner child work and bringing myself back to that time. And speaking to myself at that age, where I could remember where I felt the most disconnected or sad. So going back to that age and speaking to myself there. And also, I wrote a letter. My father had already passed at that point, but writing a letter to my father and like just saying that, I forgive him. Now, there was a forgiveness prior to him passing because when he passed, we were actually in a better state. We were communicating. I felt like I had that father-daughter relationship that I always desired when I was younger. So there was some peace with that, but there was still work I had to do. So there's something called the empty chair technique. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, it's psychology. But pretty much, if someone has passed or they're no longer in your life, you can actually have a chair in front of you, similar to writing that letter, and you speak to that person as though they were there. So I did that with my, father, with myself, forgiving myself was just basically showing compassion. Part of the forgiveness of myself was understanding that how I behaved was as a result of survival. So it was a trauma response and what my mind and body was protecting me, survival. So understanding why I selected those relationships made me have more compassion for myself. And that's how I was able to forgive. So intellectually, I was like, okay, you know what? Well, of course, if you grew up in an environment where your father was detached from you, where you never heard I love you from your father, where your father was never affectionate to you, and although he was physically there, emotionally he wasn't. Absolutely, I will always be seeking love from outside of me all the time. That's all I know. So just understanding, like stepping away from myself, understand, wow, like you did the best you could under the circumstances. But again, that didn't happen overnight because I would sometimes regress and go back to, well, you should have known better and you shouldn't have done that. So it's the should have, is eliminating the shoulds and replacing with I could. Well, I could have been better. I could have done it better, but I didn't. And that's okay. Versus should is like blaming. So should puts the blaming, could is like, well, yeah, there was opportunity to do better, but I did the best I can. With regards to the body aspect of trauma and healing trauma. So I came from the thought, the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy thought. At, thoughts leads to feelings, that leads to action, or behavior that leads to results. So that cycle, I've always thought that way.
Yeah,
Is
that's
you
how I
think,
think.
yeah, I was trained for that for many years.
Yeah.
That would, and if I was I'm not an active therapist, I moved on to entrepreneurship, but that would have been my modality. I used to swear by it. But now doing more investigation with trauma, the challenge with that is that when you keep yourself in just the thinking, you're not addressing what's happening with the body. So you can think and do mantras and affirmations. This is why a lot of people struggle with affirmation. Well, I've done the affirmations, I've done the journaling, I've done the script writing, but still I don't see the manifestations. Still, I don't see change. And the only reason why is they're not addressing what's happening with their body. Because your body, I used to think the mind influences the body, but you can think the most positive thoughts would be so dysregulated. So no matter how positive you're thinking, and I know this from my personal experience, I had the most positive thoughts, most affirmation regulated because my body was still in a trauma state and I had to then attack what was happening with my body. And the best way to do that is once you notice you're dysregulated, you have to actually speak to yourself and say, wow, your heart's beating. Wow, that feels difficult. And this was a practice that was so hard for me to do because I always wanted to think my way to change it. But the more I thought about it, it was like resistance. It was like me hitting the brick wall every time because the more I thought positively, the more dysregulated I was. I was trying to gaslight my body. So me gaslighting myself, okay, just think positive thoughts, then your body will follow. But in actuality, you have to address the body, be like, oh, why are you feeling this way? Wow, this is so hard. Oh my gosh, I usually have a lot of stress here in my chest and my shoulders. Wow, your heart's beating so fast. That's so hard right now. Ooh, I feel it in your shoulders. That's painful. And actually speaking to and staying there so that I can move past it. Because the other way of like, oh, okay, you're gonna think that everything's okay. You're feeling abundant. You're gonna think it, but then I was thinking, but my body wasn't feeling it. Once your body changes and you get yourself out of dysregulated, then it influences your thoughts better.
So it
So
was a
it's
lot
it's
of validating by the sound. It was a lot of validating how you felt and accepting and honoring just how
honoring,
you were feeling.
yeah, and
Yeah.
get an understanding where it started. So
Yeah.
you're okay, you're feeling that way. Then bring yourself back to a time where did I first felt that way? And then talking to my inner child and viewing, witnessing her
Mm.
and talking to her, say, I got your back. Wow, I know you're scared right now. I love you. I got you. You're safe now. It's okay. Because if you don't target the time when you were, whenever that trauma began, the earliest memory you have, that you thinking your way out ain't going to do nothing. It's just, it's temporary. And a lot of the personal, and I'm not knocking them because I was one of those people. But a lot of the personal development space, mindset. But hey, then why are we all so dysregulated? If it was as simple as thinking positively and affirmations and journaling, then why the hell are we all so dysregulated?
Yeah.
because we're gaslighting ourselves, because we're not identifying how we're feeling. We're not going back to the place where it started. And I speak about this so passionately because I was one of those people, positive thinking equals positive results, think and grow rich, all of these things. And I'm like, wait a minute, why am I stressed out? I'm an entrepreneur that had scaled my business to multiple 7 figures, and I was dysregulated. I had the best mindset, but was so dysregulated. And it wasn't until I started looking at the trauma work and looking at how your body influences the mind was a life changing. That was life changing for me. So yeah, yeah, take myself off the soapbox, but
No, this was amazing. And I want to thank you for sharing that, because you've actually validated something for me, because that's what I do. And I didn't even, I didn't think it was the right thing, because I spend a lot of time basically sitting and saying, I approve of the feeling that I'm having right now. Whatever you are feeling right now about this situation is perfectly acceptable and it's okay. And it's this constant approving, because I realized a couple of weeks ago that through the trauma and through the punishment through my upbringing, it left me constantly punishing myself, but also constantly disapproving. So the disapproval of just everything, because my upbringing was, it didn't really matter what I did, it was disapproved of, because it never fitted into the right box that everyone around me wanted me to fit into. So it was this constant disapproval. And then I realized, not that it really was only in the last couple of weeks, this feeling that I keep having in my chest, this constant feeling when I wake up in the morning, this is me just disapproving of myself, just purely for existing, and then punishing myself because I'm disapproving of myself, because I know that in my head somewhere that that's wrong. So it's being this unraveling and this constant conversation with myself, this constant talking to all of these different parts inside me, this constant validation. And by the sounds of it, that's kind of exactly the journey, is instead of trying to get the validation outside, instead of trying to get the validation from out, or the love outside and the validation outside and the approval outside, turn it around and just constantly do that to yourself. And then, like you said, the gaslighting, I never really thought of just saying, if I'm feeling negative, going, well, I'll just have a positive thought. I never thought of that as being gaslighting, but it actually kind of is.
yeah, because in the personal development space, we talk about that. Like, just think a positive thought, think abundant, and it will come to you. But if your body isn't feeling it, and your mind is trying to tell you, okay, well, think these positive thoughts, but your body's feeling unsafe right now. You're gaslighting, because you're not attending to the needs of your body. You're trying to convince me, and that was me abandoning myself.
Yeah.
Every time I thought positive thinking and all that stuff, I was abandoning myself because I was not paying attention to what was happening with me. I was trying to dismiss it and minimize it and say, if I'm feeling negative, I need to switch it quickly to a positive thought. I wasn't asking myself, well, why am I feeling negative? Or feeling negative is not a feeling, but why am I feeling sad? Why am I feeling scared? Why am I terrified right now? Where is this anxiety coming from? But I would be like, let me write my 100 affirmations a day and write that page in my journal every day. And my body was telling me to F off.
Yeah.
Because you know what? It was like, well, you're not paying attention to me. But the moment I realized that, wow. So when I get sometimes I'll get dysregulated. I'll be like, wow, okay, you're feeling anxious. Why? What's happening? And identify that. And that's the kindest thing you can do. It's the kindest thing. So you know the like where we go, the 4 stages, the flight, freeze, fight, freeze is usually the bottom, but you know, fight, flight, freeze, and then fawn is the newest one, where fawning is more like people pleasing and trying to fit yourself in. But every time we're in that stage, we go through it because of our trauma response. If we ignore it, then we are checking out of our body. And sometimes in the personal development stage, when we think about visualization, and it's not a bad thing, you know, visualizing your future self, having none of those stuff is bad, but it becomes problematic when we abandon our current state, so we're not dealing with it to escape. So we're escaping, we're not healing.
So when you use it as a way to escape from how you're feeling, so when you're using that visualization, if you're feeling like let's go to money, because money is such a heated conversation, and I wanted to bring money into this conversation just because of what you've created. Having the positive thinking when you're feeling broke, like you're sitting here and you're in debt up to your eyeballs, and you're sitting there and you're creating a vision board and you're running positive affirmations, and you're like, after this conversation, I'm looking at it going, that is completely using this positivity experience, personal development experience, as a way to completely disassociate from what is really going on inside your body, to disassociate from the fear and the terror. But the fear and the terror isn't even coming from the money. Using all of that positive mindset stuff to disassociate from the fear, which isn't coming from the money, that's actually coming from the trauma from the past, the patterns from the past and the fear. And that's what I'm working on as well at the moment, because my money situation is in the shithole. So I'm looking at it going, trying not to do exactly what you said, trying not to disassociate from the truth of the fear around money, the trauma around money, the panic around money. It's so deeply embedded, though, especially if you come from a family that, like most people do, really come from a family that didn't have money. Like, there's so many of us that weren't raised in abundant situations with abundant mindsets, especially my generation, because we were raised from parents that came out of the Depression and who went through wars, and it's a completely different experience. So let's talk about money and how it affected you, and then what your whole way to associate and identify with money to allow it into your space. Because for you to have created what you have created, you have to have moved into a space of allowing and acceptance and openness to energy. When you go through trauma, you don't want to open yourself to energy at all. You just want to shut it down.
Yeah, really great question. I usually call like the money story. Everybody has a money story. My parents are, I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. My parents were immigrants coming from Ghana, West Africa. And my parents they didn't come from wealth, far from it. And growing up, we had lived a very simple life. I had 3 other siblings, and we lived in a 2-bedroom condo. So it was my parents in one room and us 4 in another. Wow. We never had a big house. We never had our own room. We never had our own like vehicles. Like, we lived a very simple life, but I didn't feel like I was poor. And I think there's a difference, because coming from, like, my parents come from a third world country, like, I understand like what poverty is. We were in the Western world. I was able to go to school. I went to university. It's just that my life wasn't, I didn't have a luxury life, nothing like that. Very simple, but my parents were able to provide. We never went hungry, nothing like that. Yeah. But there was this story about money, that, wealthy people were bad. They must have done things to get money. Money doesn't come easy. You have to really work hard for money, go to school and get an education and get that stable job, because money isn't easy to come by. So that was the foundation I was coming from. And at 18, I left home and, started living on my own. And, I was like living paycheck to paycheck, working jobs. Like, I never held a job long enough. Like, no, I'm never really unemployed, but I guess I was an entrepreneur back then, didn't realize. I just kind of did a 9 to 5. But working 9 to 5, living paycheck to paycheck, feeling that money was hard, but knowing that there was possibility of another life, even though that wasn't what was around me. So just having that awareness, like, okay, there's more to life. But when I met my ex, so that was in my mid-20s, I moved to the Bronx, New York. Like, we were not living in any lavish life by all. It was like we're in the ghetto. Like, it was all that stuff. But even then, there was something inside of me knew this was not my life. there was more. And I wasn't chasing money then. Back then, it was really survival. But I lived in New York, and being in New York City, you saw the haves and you saw the have-not. You saw the different ends of the spectrum. So knowing that, so I believe I always had that mindset that you can create your reality. That from a young age, I kind of knew that that was a possibility for me. And then leaving my ex, when I was on my own, I lived in New York a little bit after him, then I moved to New Jersey. And being around other people that actually made, like I did different jobs, but I saw them making money. I was like, oh, I can do this too. That's when entrepreneurship began for me, living in Europe, being exposed to that. I understand that you can make that American dream, but then I moved back to Canada. So it was a not so much the Canada dream. But understanding that, again, I was all mindset. So I believe that my mind can dictate that. And then I started entrepreneurship officially with my business 7 years ago. I knew that money was an exchange. I knew that energetically you attract who you are. And I knew that what you put out there, what you reap what you sow. So I was really big with principles. What I plan today will determine my tomorrow. I knew that for very young, maybe from reading the Bible and all this stuff. What I plan today determines my tomorrow. So I was really big with that simple principle. Yeah, the law of attraction, and then later understanding the law of assumption and all that stuff. But I believed. But even when I believed, I still had anxiety around money. So I didn't hold money for long. I accumulated a lot of debt. And I have a lot of debt right now. I had to change my lens around debt as well, because a lot of my debt came from, well, okay, many years of debt. So before I used to spend frivolously, like nothing, just spend and spend. And then later I started investing spending. So leveraging debt to invest in my home, to invest in business, all that stuff. But I still had an unsafe feeling around debt. So I was told from my mother at a young age, debt's bad. If you can't afford it, it's not in your account, you don't use it on card. That was how I was raised. So when I started to rack up the debt, there was a lot of anxiety. And in entrepreneurship, your money goes up and down, up and down. So there was that fear around that. So when I changed the lens around my debt, understanding that, okay, the debt is it's just money. It's how we view it. It's money. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. It's fine.
So can I interrupt? How did you change the lens? So how did you change the lens around your debt?
Yeah, when I understood that other business entrepreneurs had millions of dollars in debt. Like my debt's a few $100,000. But when I looked at them, like, most businesses do operate as some type of debt. And so when I invested in myself, I looked, okay, it's a business expense. So if it's a business expense, and I don't want to say it's a good debt, because there's people invest or spend, have debt not because of business, but understanding that that it's just the form of money. It's just like credit card is just a form of transaction. Where there's cash or credit, it's an exchange that's happening. So when there's an exchange, I got something for leveraging that. Yes, I still owe that money, and I still write it off. It's a business expense. So now that I write it off as a business expense, it became more bearable. But at the beginning, it wasn't. The reason why it wasn't, because I didn't look at it as a business expense. I looked at it as me taking a risk on me, and I didn't think I was deserving of that. I thought, well, why am I investing so much in me when you don't have them? And what happens if you don't see your returns? Then you're a failure. I had all this attachment to it. So change the lens, saying it's a business. I'm a business. I'm a CEO. I may carry debt. Debt is for a time. You have a plan to pay it off. Understanding that there's a plan, and understanding that it's just a use of it's just exchange. You're exchanging. You're using that debt to get something in return. So it's part of life. It's just a form of payment that you use, and I'm making my payments. So it's not like where, and I don't want to say it's bad debt, because some people say, well, I purchased this bag and on a credit card. And I used to do that too. And that's not the debt I have now, but I used to do that. I used to spend. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all this money and spend. And I would feel bad about it later. Um, if you can pay it off, it's when you are spending because you're not happy with where you are at now,
Yeah.
and you feel like material goods are going to give you peace. That's when there's going to be that disconnect, and that's when you're going to feel bad. But now, when I invest in myself for business, I don't feel that way anymore because I look at it as a business expense. But to answer your question about feeling dysregulated, about being in debt, especially in the entrepreneurship world, it is normal to feel dysregulated when you're in debt because our body needs safety. So if you can't pay your bills, you are going to be dysregulated, and that's normal. There's no wishing your way out, thinking your way out of it. It means I gotta have a plan. Meaning, do I need to get a second job to make sure my bills are met? Like there's basic, the Maslow theory. You need basic standard of living, shelter, food, water. Like if you are compromising that, you will immediately feel dysregulated. That's normal. And we shouldn't shame ourselves for feeling bad. So for example, if you invested, I don't know, $10,000 in a container, but you really didn't have the $10,000, you don't know when your rent, if you're going to be able to pay rent or a mortgage, then yeah, you're going to be dysregulated. And thinking you're positively is not going to fix that.
No, because then that disassociates from the dysregulation, and then you're gaslighting your dysregulation, as opposed to going all the way back to the very beginning of our conversation, which is if you can sit in the dysregulation and own it and validate it and be in the mud with it, then I'm guessing. So my question is, if you sit in the mud with your dysregulation, or you sit in the mud with your feelings, does that bring you back into regulation just by sitting with it and being in it? So that, yeah, I think that's kind of my concern, is that if I spend too much time in the mud with all of my stuff, it's still not going to change anything.
That's a great question. And sitting alone with your feelings or not, there's something called emotional flooding, where all your emotions become at once, and that can be overwhelming, and that's not safe either. It's determining your tolerance level. So if you're noticing something, maybe your heart's racing, you can put your hand on your heart and like, oh, my heart's racing. I have one of my mentors, she uses this technique, it's called SAFE. And SAFE stands for, S is for seeing. So you may acknowledge you're seeing yourself, maybe your past self dysregulated. Then you're affirming, you're speaking to yourself, saying it's okay. Then the F, so A is for affirming, the F is for feeling, noticing what you're feeling, identifying it, acknowledging it, and then E is for expressing it. Okay, I'm noticing I'm feeling this. I'm feeling dysregulated right now. Why am I feeling dysregulated? Sitting in your feelings and feeling all the feelings can be overwhelming if a lot is coming to you at once. So it's not just feeling the feelings unless you have someone to process them with you. But if you're by yourself, it can be a lot. And I know, and I used to say too, just sit and feel the feelings, but it can be overwhelming. It's noticing what you can handle. And when it cuts too much, you do have to separate and be like, okay, it's too much. Unless you have a trained therapist or coach that can guide you through that safely. Yeah. Because it's our trauma, it can be overwhelming. Especially when you start to tap in. Oh, I never noticed that. Oh my gosh, I noticed I've been checking out all my life. When did I start? Oh, that started when I had this trauma. That can be overwhelming.
Yeah. And
So
also the punishing yourself. For me, that was the big overwhelm, was seeing how much throughout the day, when I started observing how much I was punishing myself just constantly throughout the day. And then realizing that this constant feeling like a worthless sack of shit every minute of every day was coming from that constant punishment. And then having to look at that, and then also looking at the journey ahead, going, how am I even going to, like, where do I even start with this? Just being at the beginning of unraveling all of your trauma and all of these feelings. And then also realizing how much your trauma has dictated your present moment. Because one of the things I really get is when you have trauma, especially if you have it when you're a kid, you're on this beautiful path of birth, and then you come in as this pure innocent child, and then some point you have trauma, but it takes you to here. So now all of a sudden you're not taking an action from this perfect human being, you're taking action from this trauma part. And then you have another piece of trauma, which then takes you a little bit further off path, and then another piece of trauma. And then all of a sudden you get to your 30s and 40s and 50s, and you go, holy crap, all of this trauma has pushed me so far off path that I'm so far away from who I actually really am.
Yes.
It's so overwhelming, because I get that the only way for me to move forward into an abundant, healthy, happy, vibrant life is to do it while acknowledging the trauma, while acknowledging the pain, because it's obviously never going to go away, because it's a part of who I am. And I don't live in that philosophy that it will just disappear. Once you deal with it, it just magically disappears and rainbows and fairies and unicorns replace it. It doesn't. It's always here. So it's realizing that I am going to possibly be validating this pain in some aspect for the rest of my life. It might not be every minute of every day. It'll soften and it'll quieten down, but it is overwhelming to think that when you're at the start or in the middle, and to think there's so much more to go.
Yeah.
I know there wasn't a question in that, but that's the hard part for me. I can feel it now. It sits in my heart and I go, I've got so far to go. I've come so far, but I've still got so far to go.
I think a lot of people take the stance to try to heal all your trauma. And I think the goal is to just have a level of awareness. So I know new level, new devil, but the more you're aware, so you may focus on one behavior and then you may begin to explore it and maybe trace it back, or get to a place where you can manage your emotions when you're dysregulated, but then you may discover something new. So it's like peeling layers. We will never be fully trauma free. It's just being aware of our trauma, because there's so many of us that are not aware that they're reacting in life and not knowing why they're reacting the way they're reacting. They're just responding. But if you stay in your body as much as you can tolerate, and then identify when things are not feeling good, and then finding out why that is, and you do that all the time, eventually you'll get to a place where you'll just notice things. Okay, I'm noticing I'm dysregulated, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh my gosh, I'm this person that's what's the word, like, broken. I think the main breakthrough is understanding that you're not broken. You're not broken. What is that you may have some, wounds. Doesn't mean you're broken.
It definitely feels like broken. I say I'm broken a lot, because it does. It feels like you're broken.
But it's just a wound. Like, I was on vacation, I scratched up my legs, I fell off the jet skis and all that stuff. And I go, you know what? I have some gashes right now, but you know what? I'm not broken. I'm still whole. Just have some cuts. And I just need to now focus on that cut now and apply some ointment to put a Band-Aid to cover it from the scrapes, but eventually that too would heal. And my skin might rise a little bit as a reminder that was there. I'm not broken.
That is such a good point. Thank you for saying that. It's a good shift in perspective, because I know I hold on to thinking that I'm broken. But from this conversation, I'm going to shift that wording to say I'm not broken. I'm a little bit wounded, but that wound can heal. And it might have a scar, but it can heal. It's not broken. I'm not in a million pieces on the ground.
That's right.
And I want to ask just one more thing around money.
Yeah.
What would you say was that you remember was a defining shift in your mindset to allow you to open up to receiving money? That might be a big question.
Yeah, I think for me was Okay. I'll just mainly just talk about the energetics. So usually in business, I'll talk a lot about the strategy and stuff, but I'll keep it energetics for tonight. They'll be like, oh, Ruth, you're not talking strategy today. For me, was understanding that I am no different than anyone else that has abundance and wealth and all that. That we all start the same day. We all have the same opportunities. It's allowing myself to be open to the possibility of what's out there for me. That I don't want to say I'm nothing, no one's special, but I mean, we're all special in our right. But one person isn't more special than the other. One person is not more luckier than the other. You have to put yourself in situations where that can happen for you. So what the problem why people get stuck with the whole manifestation is that they just want to think their way through it, and then when they don't see any results, they wonder what happened. But you actually have to not just mentally, but physically put yourself in situations where that can happen, where that window of opportunity can happen, and then you got to walk through it. There's this actress, I don't know, Kerry Washington. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Anyways, to the American actress, and she was on. There was a clip of her, and someone was talking about. I want to say manifestation, but maybe it wasn't manifestation. She said to herself, "You got to, in terms of opportunity, you have to put it out there that you want the opportunity. But when you see that bus coming, you better run for that bus. If you see that bus coming, you got to run for it because that could be your chance. You can't just sit back and lean back." And let the bus go by and be like, oh, well, it didn't happen for me. Go, well, that was your bus. Did you run for it? Did you allow yourself to say, I'm ready for it? Because I think what happens in the spiritual entrepreneurship world, we focus on this lean back, let me remain in my feminine and just receive. And there's a time for that, but you also have to put yourself in a position to actually receive it. You can't just sit and wish upon a star in your house. I am manifesting millions. Money comes to me easily, frequently, abundant. I'm a magnet for my. Okay, that's beautiful things to say, but you have to be in alignment. You have to be in the line to receive it. And that was it for me. So when I went into business for myself, I realized that, oh, okay, when I started generating money, I go, oh, there's a system to this. And a lot of people don't like to talk about systems. They want to talk about the magic dust, pixie dust, and magnetism, but there's the doing behind it.
No, I want the specifics. I want the systems and the strategies. I've done the magic dust and it doesn't work.
Great. Okay, I can talk to you on this. Okay, maybe your audience will appreciate this. I strongly believe that you need systems to support your energy.
Yeah.
Relying solely on your energy to generate wealth is not sustainable. And then let's talk a business now. If we want to go there, is you have to have a system in place that systematically brings your potential buyers through a journey. So for me, I did not scale my business to $7 million by not having a system or organization in place. So yes, I energetically had to show up and lead my team. And I do believe in the magic of the energy and how you show up, but also had a system in place. How do I connect with clients? How do I communicate? How do we communicate our offers? What is the delivery system? How is it? How do we retain them? How was our messaging? Is the messaging speaking to our ideal client? Like these things we need to do to attract. We need to do things to attract. We need to have a system in place to attract. So there's too many people in the spiritual entrepreneurship world that will talk about, well, just hold on to your energy and it will come.
But do you think that's the dysregulation and the disassociation because of the trauma that then automatically sets them up to block the business? Because it's very big in the spiritual world. I've been in the spiritual world for a long, long time, and we're all kind of the same. Is none of us want to step into our masculine. None of us want to step into that system, the strategy, the business, like that whole energy thing. We all just want to sit back and kumbaya ourselves into rainbows and unicorns and magic fairy dust filled with money that's just going to come and sit on the table. And it is that, and I get so clearly now that it is my dysregulated part that is stopping me from doing the practical strategy, the work to actually generating the business. And I have so many friends that are in the same situation as me. They're amazing people, and we've all got these amazing gifts, and we'd all be amazing mentors and amazing coaches, but we're so blocked in doing this that you're talking about. So how do we get from being in this happy unicorn rainbows place to not being so dysregulated to be able to do the strategies? How did you get from where you were into being able to take those actions, which are very masculine actions?
Yeah, they are. In order to feel safe in your feminine, you need to have that protection.
Yeah.
You need to feel safe. And that's where the masculine comes in. The masculine provides the safety. It provides the safety. The systems are there to provide the safety. The system in your business tells you, I can predict income next month. I can predict income next week. So, for example, when I was in Carousel for a week on the beach, snorkeling on the boat, I was not plugged into my business, and my business still generated 32K cash collected. Why? Because there was a system in place. So I can remain in my feminine on the boat, in the beach, in the water, with my husband, doing the beautiful things, making love, while the system, the masculine, was able to take care of my needs.
And can I just share what I just got as you were sharing that? It's the fear. It's not only the fear of the masculine internal, but it's the fear of the masculine external, because I believe so many of us have been abused by men, not their fault, but we have been abused by men. So there is that fear of man, and there is that association between the man on the outside and the masculine on the inside. There's so much fear around the masculine, the abuse, the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse. Especially the sexual abuse to ourselves, allowing ourselves to be in relationships with men who do sexually abuse us, or put ourselves in situations where we have been sexually abused. There is still that shame. There is still that ownership that, well, I did that. And I guess it doesn't seem like it's associated, but as I'm looking at it now, and I'm looking at my wounds around the men, the volume of men that have physically abused my physical body, and then allowing myself to be in that position and going, am I afraid of my masculine because I'm afraid of the masculine?
That's very powerful what you just shared. And actually, to really look at it like that, it took me a long time to feel safe with men. So I'm now married for almost 2 years now. And prior to my marriage, prior to this relationship, as I mentioned, I usually attract men that were avoided. And I felt very unsafe with them. But I was taught the whole Disney fairy tale that you need to feel butterflies in your stomach and chemistry and fireworks. And that's what equates to a good relationship, or an appealing relationship, or a desirable relationship. And I realized that was just my nervous system saying danger, 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 danger. Those fireworks is not actually safe and sustainable. So being in my relationship now, after going through my coaching, I met that dating coach and learning like where my attachment styles came from. That's how I was able to identify and be able to, connect with my now husband in a different way. So the safety in the masculine, and you're right, there's a lot of women that don't feel safe. And it took me a very long time to feel safe with men, and even the idea of it. And there's so many people that get stuck with that because they're like, I never had that model for me. I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah.
And that took work, knowing that and sometimes women escape the safety because they think that's false, it's not real, it's not familiar. Let me go to the danger that I'm familiar with. But then when they're in the danger, it's a cycle. Then you get some women that completely detached. I'm not even going there anymore. I'm going to protect me. But in that way, they're actually being in their masculine.
Yep, that's me. I am the I'm not going there anymore. I'm completely detached from men. There's no safety. I was so detached from men that my daughter is actually a donor. I didn't even want to have a child in a relationship. because I didn't want to go through that trauma. I see so many of my friends who have separated from their partners, and then the trauma they go through with their partner having part control over their child. I didn't want to do any of that. So I chose the path of a donor. I'm the only human being in this world that has control over my child and the decisions that are made. And it's amazing how linked the money is, because when you mentioned Disney, my daughter wanted to watch Cinderella, and I have big issues with Disney, but she really wanted to see it because all of her friends have seen them. I said, okay, let's sit down and watch it. And she ended up not liking it at all and having horrendous nightmares from it. But as I was watching it, I'm like, oh, this is why I'm so like just screwed up in the brain, because all the women depicted in all of these movies when I was growing up, they're weak. They're waifs. They're nobodies. They're not important. They're not relevant until Prince Charming gives them attention. You look at Cinderella and Snow White and Rapunzel, they are all, and not only are they not relevant, but they are hated by other women in their family simply for existing. Cinderella and Rapunzel and Snow White, they didn't do anything to be hated to the level that they were hated, other than the fact that they just exist. And I have such a strong identification with being hated just because I exist on this planet. And it's interesting when I've been putting all of these pieces together going, now I get why there's so much punishment for me on a day-to-day, and why I struggle so much with money, and why I struggle so much with the masculine, because I sit there and I think, I don't want to be this weak female. I don't want to be a weak female to have a man. I don't want to be that. So all of a sudden I go, well, I'm not going to be a weak female, therefore I'm not going to have a man. But then if I don't have a man, then I can't generate the money, because the man's meant to generate the money, because he's the one that is the provider and he's the hunter. And there's like all of these stories and programs that just they just get into your system. So I love hearing from people like you who have, in whatever way, have managed to move past that program and managed to move past that story and going, no, I don't have to be a weak woman to earn money. I can actually step into my masculine and step into my feminine and embrace both of them and earn money and earn good money and be proud of it.
Yes. For the longest time, even before I was in that abusive relationship, I always thought I would be a single mom. And the reason why I was so opposed to marriage, because of what I saw with my parents. My parents were arranged marriage. My father was 17 years older than my mother, and they came from different worlds. Even though they're from the same country, my mother was from the country, my father was from the city. He was educated, my mother wasn't. There was all this power dynamic.
Yeah.
And the way my father treated my mother was like, it was a loveless marriage, and we saw it growing up. So for the longest time, I thought to myself, I would never marry. I did desire to be a mom, though. It hasn't happened yet, but I always thought I'll be a single mom. And I was okay with that until, it wasn't until I started doing the work on myself, saying, well, you know why? I was protecting myself. I didn't want to feel trapped. There was some subconsciously, I thought, if I wasn't going to be in a marriage, I would be trapped. If he abuses me, I won't be able to get out. Even though I landed in abusive relationships prior to marriage, but I felt that I wanted to control. I am in control. I can control what happens to my child. I have full autonomy. But then I realized that I was protecting myself. But who was I protecting myself from? And it was me not trusting myself enough. So it takes a lot of strength to be with another partner, because some women believe, oh, well, if I'm in a man, I'm giving up my power. If he leads me, I'm giving up my power. But it takes a lot of power, like you're leading each other. And I want to say right now that you yourself are loved. Right? You are loved. You can't, there's no one that's going to give you that love but you and God. God loves you as you are in your full form. You are loved. That's right. I don't know if you believe in God, but I do. You are fully loved. And the love that we have for ourselves, like anyone that comes into our life right now, they are an addition to who you are. You're whole already. That was my big aha in relationships. I am whole. I'm not incomplete if I'm single. I am whole. And until I got to that place, understanding that, well, if I'm single for the rest of my life, I'm okay. That's when things shifted for me. So it's not about giving your power. It's not it takes a strong woman to be in a relationship, to have someone lead. And I believe in leading each other, but it does take a strong woman to be led. Because in my opinion, we are the stronger sex. But because people think that whole submissiveness and feminine weak. No, it's not. It's very strong. We're very strong. We're very powerful. And yeah, and we have men that protect us. There's men that do bad things, and there's many men that are amazing. They're there to protect. And that's what the masculine is. And that's what a system is. A system is to protect you so you can have that ease and flow in your life. So you can have that safety. You don't have systems, then you're all over the place, chaotic, and money doesn't flow. The system needs to be there. And there's a lot of high-level spiritual entrepreneurs that talk about the ease and flow, but they don't talk about the systems they have. They all have systems. They may not talk about their marketing. And then trust me, I've invested a lot in these containers. They all have systems. No matter how much you talk about ease and flow, they all have systems. And I say it because I sat at the table. I paid money to be at their tables. They have systems behind it. They have teams. They have people helping them. They can't fly on their private jets without a system in place. You can manifest their unicorns and butterflies. But you can't have a system to do it.
Yeah. Oh, I could keep talking, but I know that it's late for you. I seriously keep talking. It's a downside of being on the other side of the world. I have to be really aware that the people I'm talking to, it is really late for them. But I am so thankful for you sharing all of this with me. I'm going to listen to this again because there's so much information in there for me to move into that next phase. Of allowing and loving the masculine, and allowing and loving money, and allowing and loving that strength. I'm going to have to listen to this again. Can you please share where people can find you?
Well, if you're on Instagram, my Instagram handler is salescoachruth.biz. On Facebook, my full name, Ruth Larby. And on LinkedIn, Ruth Larby. I'm barely on LinkedIn. But yeah, this has been fantastic. Just, I guess my main takeaways is that you can, like, masculine is good. It's the beautiful thing. You need the balance. And with trauma, your body does influence your mind. If you keep gaslighting your body's just not gonna be happy with you. You're gonna come to, you're gonna be clashing every time. And debt is just that. You don't have to make it mean more than what it is. It's that. If you have debt, anyone that's watching right now, yeah, debt, just make a plan to pay down, but don't live by the debt. That's just that. It doesn't define you. It doesn't make you less than. It's just that. It's just you use that towards something. There was an exchange. That's it. And masculine is good. And systems are good. That's all I have. I have to say that again. For the spiritual entrepreneurs that are watching, systems are beautiful because you can have that ease and flow once you have the systems in place.
Yeah. And that was such a good point that you made, that all of these people, they all have systems. They all might sell ease and flow, but they all have systems. Yeah.
They have systems. And I'm sorry, I get worked up because I talk to so many spiritual entrepreneurs that are saying, well, wait a minute, I've been holding my energy and I'm doing all the things and I'm not seeing results. Well, because you don't have the system supporting your energy is not a strategy. It's not a sales strategy. Your business can't rely on your energy alone. It can't. It's not. You're up and down.
Yeah.
You wake up one day, you're feeling like, oh my gosh, who am I? Today you feel like top of the world. If your business depends on your energy, that's
Yeah.
it.
So I just finished that call with Ruth. That was huge. That was huge. I have come to so many realizations just on that call about the ownership, but more so about the validation, like the really, 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 really deep validation that needs to come through the healing, because it's the denial, it's the disassociation, it's the abandonment. Like Ruth said abandonment a lot, and it's that abandonment of self that we do that validates the trauma, that keeps the trauma going. And I have started doing those conversations where I am validating how I feel and I'm acknowledging how I feel, and I'm sitting there and I'm feeling it and I'm saying, I hear you, I feel you, thank you, I love you, and sitting in that and also having those conversations. And I feel like Ruth validated a lot of this for me, because some of the things I've been doing is having conversations to talk myself off the ledge and to talk myself off rowing myself off the ledge, really, and going down that rabbit hole of pain. Is I sit and I talk to myself and I actually say, it's okay, you are safe. I use a lot of in this moment right now statements, because for me, I am safe doesn't feel right, because I might not be safe in other areas in my life, but I can sit and say, in this moment right now, I am safe. And I can look around and go, I am safe in this moment right now. So that has really worked well for me. And I feel like Ruth, this whole conversation with Ruth has just validated all of that for me, and also validated the money trauma, the money story, the masculine, the denying the masculine and pushing the masculine away and resisting and rejecting that whole energy. And that, of course, we talked, comes into the food and the eating disorder and the money and the partner, and just life in general is that constant abandonment and rejection of self and of the masculine, especially in business. So that was a huge conversation, and I'm so much appreciation to her for having it for me. Yeah. So please do make sure you check out Ruth. I think her and I are going to have a couple more conversations, especially around food and money. And they're going to be really valuable conversations to have. So to make sure you keep in touch, like this channel, and please subscribe, because when I do put up those episodes, you're going to want to see them. They are going to be incredible conversations. Check out the description below, because Ruth's details are going to be in it, and you can also find the link to my website as well. And if you are wanting to have coaching to bring you into more awareness, because it's the awareness of the trauma that is really helping me. And I have spent the last 17 years of my life bringing myself into more and more and more awareness around my trauma. Then please make sure you go and check out my website, lovecreatesfreedom.com. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Ruth for sharing all of this amazing information. And please do remember, you are greatly appreciated.